Excerpt. A photography series based on the 2 to 2 to 1 aspect ratio Kubrick used for his prize film 2001: A Space Odyssey. The series is photographed with the high-resolution camera, Sony A7R II, in glorious 42 megapixels, and most importantly a 21mm wide-angle Leica M-mount lens by a German optical manufacturer, Voigtlander. This setup was used to warp the photos, giving a slight anamorphic warped appearance, especially near the edges, and this is of course an ode to the Panavision anamorphic lenses Kubrick was using in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I spent 5 hours at the exhibit at the Design Museum in London. Average time for a visit I later found out was about 1.5 hours. Sorry, not sorry. Documenting what I feel will be a tight contrast photography series of his films and props on display. I then was careful to select the color palette for the series using film emulations based within the best match of a broad color palette that I felt Kubrickian to me, primarily mixed between A Clockwork Orange and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Further from there went hours into removing reflections and exhibition artifact numbers of perhaps 300 to 500 in total. A short gallery of that before and after can be seen at the bottom of this page. In all, I hope those who love this genius can experience these props and photographs from my perspective and enjoy a little bit of Kubrick archiving for the rest of the world to see, who might not otherwise have the chance to come to this wonderful exhibition. Thank you, readers. And we begin. Can someone you've never met really change your life? Is it possible to meet yourself as someone else? When I was younger, I felt a recluse to be a menace, a waste on society. Then I learned about a man named Stanley Kubrick, and I engaged. I think sometimes when you look at a genius, you find a few things that are always the same. They live their lives in slow, ever-growing stages. There's years of turmoil, years of passion, and as Kubrick said, and I paraphrase, they are, aren't they? The most creative years of your life are in your 20s. And then they slow down. You have to work harder for it. There was this. For Kubrick, what followed would be years between films, even over a decade in some cases. Everyone waited. Many times Kubrick fell between the floorboards to people's lives until all of a sudden he had another masterpiece in cinema up on screen, seemingly out of nowhere. Never would he rush a single stage. Kubrick was a photographer for Look magazine as one of its youngest contributors from a teenager. When he realized he could rent his own film camera and buy some film, that's exactly what he did. He filmed his first short about a boxer for Look magazine, and it caught attention. Within a few years, an investment from some of his family members, he made what would be his first film and his first failure to himself on record. The funny thing is, this failure to himself would be a success to any other filmmaker at only 25 years old, who helmed the entire production himself and never had any formal training. The next stages of his life seem to have been in long, drawn-out stages, as mentioned above. I believe him to be a man of one direction at a time, and I see myself in him every time I feel that fact-showing face. He was a director for hire for a few films, such as Spartacus, but it was really just to get his footing in the door. He had to control himself. I believe this came from being a photographer first. He would go into the city with himself, and without scope or aid, he would find moments that he felt the world needed to see. People have tried to create some of these photographs in the same location. You can see the lack of talent even when they're only a few degrees off from the real thing. He'd had that vision, and he knew that one frame would capture someone and one wouldn't. One angle would make the paper an imagination, and one would never be seen by anyone but the photographer for that one single blink in the entire history of the universe. Gone. One film, one creator. That was his MO from the start. Photography taught him that with enough patience, he too could compress years of work and soul onto screen, even for but a few hours at a time. Throughout the years, he then crafted some of his masterpiece films, most of which most of us reading will know, such as A Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, Barry Lyndon, and Eyes Wide Shut. I think the most important aspect of these films, though, live under the veil. Each craft took on an obsession beyond all others. He made most of his films from his new home of London. He lived to what many describes a hermit for a good portion of his life at home, with just his wife simply researching every single aspect of the inevitable, just so that every shot would feel as if it had backing, power, and feeling. And most importantly, that it was shot to the exact degree that would last longer than he did. This dedication got so intimate that he once had a file cabinet with every day of Napoleon's fighting career detailed on cards. Photograph of said cabinet excitingly has made this exhibition and is in the series below. Time to explain the series. Since I myself moved to London in 2015, I had known about the Kubrick exhibit circling the Western world and figured it would have to return to London at some point. I was coming home from a terrible night out when I noticed his poster in the London Underground. It struck me. Kubrick's home. 2001 was the film that changed my life. It wasn't the only one, but it was the one that felt like the most obsession hidden in its walls to open your mind to the bigger things in life. The film wasn't about relationships between people or memories or even flashbacks. It didn't have shaky camera love stories or car crashes. It had this story to explain an alternate view of history in the deepest way. It had what I see deepest in Kubrick: stages, segments. It taught me to be calm, and that science fiction could reach its own intelligent audience. I also knew that if he could explain the universe with slow-paced, perfect moments, maybe we all have a chance to learn to think outside of ourselves too. Science fiction. Also, I always had a fascination of our future by discovering our past. Where would we become? What, and most importantly, who would mankind create? How would we pass ourselves on past this story when the world would end? In other words, HAL 9000 being more human than his human counterparts in 2001: A Space Odyssey instantly struck me as a work of genius only someone forward-thinking could create in the way that it was created. As mankind traveled in an attempt to meet its makers, HAL already was in command of his makers. He had different questions, different curiosities. Mankind is forever trapped down to our biological history. Perspective of our own is entirely different from a being without those necessities and needs. We might live harmoniously with AI someday, yet we'll always be in an alternate universe inside our 1 million-year-old brains. Hal understood his mission, and he wouldn't be flawed to change course, even if it was most of his own existences at the time. We'll never know fully, but I think those were the values Kubrick took to heart, and he left a little bit of himself in that still robot, wishing for more in life than humans ever could. He'd already met his maker. He had bigger questions. He had to prove to himself more than anybody else did. He always did. Kubrick lives in a rare breed of directors, and a breed that is rare today with the ever-increasing amount of everything that we have on offer. Overabundance is definitely the death of creativity. It's a slow death in always having more, always having better, so close. It's not human, it's not natural, but it's here to stay. A student of Kubrick will learn that he teaches us stillness. It teaches us, as this exhibition shows, that there's romance in written letters, in being alone, and being obsessed with something so much that waging your time on it now could eventually compound to become much longer in other people's lives. But only if you do it well enough. That's the scary part. If. One film could become hundreds of years of people's time if it succeeds over a vast horizon of movie-going humanoids on Earth, and maybe someday beyond. It could become 100 lives of conversations with strangers, thousands of years of career, and life-changing ambitions for filmmakers or designers or dreamers. Creation while alive is perhaps our best trial at the butterfly effect on a massive scale in a global village. Thoughts like this make remarks over him being a hermit make someone who is too quick to reach seem like a thin veil, an anonymous poking habit with no true straight line and endgame. What I'm getting at in the void here is that it was important for me to spend an evening with Kubrick, not only because I've already spent hundreds with him and his art, but to capture moments from his films in my own light. Every artist from young has hoped to begin a journey of also living past their time, past existentialism. Today, gracefully, my time will continue through you, the reader, the viewer, the connoisseur, the lover, perhaps the fellow hermit, or maybe the failure, the fighter, the 9-to-5er, the gave-upper, or hopefully the one who might not get a chance to see their hero's work. This one is for you. Let's do well because we can live exponential lives through strangers if we learn to give our soul into something, to learn to keep true, to learn to pass on what we can, but only over time, just enough. Learn stages. I hope this series of Kubrick not only makes you want to visit or revisit his work, his past interviews, his passions, but also remember how much preservation is worth for all of us. If 2001 had some truth, it was lived within the life of the man himself. If we keep trying, we'll reach the next stage. and sometimes it's okay not to know where that might take us. Thank you, Stanley, for teaching me life matters, passion matters, cinema saves, and most importantly, for changing my life. I hope someone sees this series and they too decide to dive deeper into what you left all of us. Below is my series, my form of Kubrick preservation, through the aspect ratio of my favorite film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I present to you in glorious 2:2:1, Kubrick and Anamorphic. End. The first part of this series will live in the series selects below, around 40 photographs chosen, which stand as the basis of this series. The second batch in the gallery below will be the remaining 45 images, additionally with some small descriptions of some of them. At the bottom of this page are a few examples of the preservation work I did to allow a gallery showing to become its own series, including hundreds of reflections edited out. Enjoy, friends. Thanks for listening.